The moment the rumor spread through Lincoln High School like wildfire, Jude knew his life would never be the same again. He had been outed by a careless text message from his phone that fell into the wrong hands during gym class, and now the entire senior class had turned their backs on him as if he carried some contagious disease. Jude sat alone at the cafeteria table that first afternoon, his tray of untouched pizza growing cold while whispers rippled around him like a storm he could not escape. "Did you hear? Jude's gay." Someone hissed just loud enough for the words to land like stones. He kept his eyes fixed on the scratched plastic surface, heart hammering so hard he thought the whole room could hear it. The isolation hit instantly, seats emptying around him as if an invisible force field had formed. Across the crowded room, Jason, the star quarterback with the easy smile and broad shoulders that made half the school swoon, laughed loudly with his teammates but never once glanced Jude's way. Their secret nights under the bleachers, stolen kisses that tasted like summer and fear, felt like a distant dream now. Jude had trusted Jason with everything, yet here he was, pretending they were strangers. The betrayal burned hotter than the stairs. That evening Jude walked home through the quiet suburbs of this small California town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business and secrets lasted about 5 minutes. His mother opened the door before he even reached the porch, her eyes already soft with worry. "Baby, what happened?" she asked, pulling him into a hug that smelled like vanilla and safety. Jude broke then, the words tumbling out between sobs. She listened without judgment, stroking his hair and whispering that she loved him exactly as he was. His father, home from his construction job, sat at the kitchen table in silence, fork paused over his plate. The disappointment in his eyes was quieter than anger but heavier all the same. "We'll figure it out," was all he managed, but the air in the house felt thicker afterward. The next morning was worse. Jude's locker had been decorated overnight with crude drawings and the word "fag" scrawled in permanent marker. He peeled the tape off slowly, fingers trembling, while students streamed past pretending not to notice. In English class, the seat beside him stayed empty even though the room was full. The teacher, Ms. Rivera, cleared her throat and started the lesson on Shakespeare as if nothing had changed, but her eyes flicked to Jude with a pity he hated. At lunch, Sarah, his friend since middle school, slid into the seat across from him despite the dirty looks from her usual group. "They're idiots," she whispered, but even she kept her voice low, glancing over her shoulder. Jude forced a smile, grateful for the small island of kindness in an ocean of rejection. Jason avoided him completely. In the hallway, their shoulders almost brushed and Jude caught the flicker of panic in those familiar blue eyes before Jason turned away. The memory of Jason's hands on his face just 2 weeks earlier, whispering "you're everything to me," now felt like a cruel joke. Jude spent the afternoon in the art room, the only place that still felt safe, sketching frantic lines across paper until the bell rang. His drawing showed 2 figures standing back to back, one reaching out, the other walking away. He tore it up before anyone could see. By the end of the week, the boycott had become official. Someone started a group chat called "Keep It Straight," and the rules were simple. No talking to Jude, no sitting near him, no acknowledging he existed. Even the soccer team he used to watch from the sidelines stopped waving when he passed. Jude's grades began to slip. Focus was impossible when every breath felt watched. At home, his mother cooked his favorite meals and left encouraging notes on his pillow, but his father retreated into long silences and extra shifts at work. Jude lay awake each night replaying every moment he had ever felt safe in his own skin, wondering if being honest had been the worst mistake of his life. The internal storm raged louder than any insult. He questioned everything. His worth, his future, whether love between men could ever exist without costing this much pain. The pressure from the small-town mentality pressed in from all sides. Neighbors who once smiled now crossed the street. His cousin texted from the next town over asking if the rumors were true, and then stopped replying when Jude said yes. Sarah tried to stay strong but confessed one afternoon that her own friends were giving her ultimatums. "I'm not leaving you," she promised. Yet Jude saw the strain in her eyes. In the quiet moments he allowed himself to remember the good days with Jason. Late-night drives along the coast, laughter that felt like freedom, the way Jason's voice softened when they were alone. Those memories now tasted like ash. As October turned colder, Jude started writing in a notebook he kept hidden under his mattress. The words poured out raw and unfiltered, not accusations but questions. Why does loving someone make me the enemy? What are you all so afraid of? He did not know yet that those pages would become the letter that would haunt an entire class for the rest of their lives. The days blurred together in a haze of loneliness, but deep inside a small spark of resolve began to flicker. He was still Jude, still the boy who loved art and bad horror movies and the ocean at sunrise. No amount of silence could erase that. Yet the weight of being invisible in a school of 1,200 students was slowly crushing him, and he wondered how much longer he could carry it alone. The weekend brought no relief. Jude rode his bike to the beach alone, wind whipping his hair, and sat on the sand watching waves crash. He pulled out his phone and stared at Jason's last text from before everything exploded. "Can't wait to see you tonight." He deleted it, then immediately regretted the finality. Back home, his mother waited with hot chocolate and gentle questions about college applications, trying to steer him toward a future beyond these walls. His father watched football in the living room, the volume turned up a little too loud. Jude excused himself early, retreating to his room where the notebook waited. Page after page filled with the ache he could not voice out loud. Monday morning the stares had not lessened. In fact, they felt sharper, as if the class had decided his silence meant guilt. Someone accidentally knocked his books out of his hands in the corridor and walked away laughing. Jude knelt to pick them up, cheeks burning, when a familiar pair of sneakers stopped beside him. For one wild second he hoped it was Jason. It was only Sarah, helping gather the scattered papers with a tight smile. "This is getting ridiculous," she muttered. But even her support felt fragile against the wall of rejection surrounding him. The internal crisis deepened with every passing hour. Jude began to wonder if he should have stayed hidden, if the comfort of secrecy was worth more than this public crucifixion. The conflict tore at him, the part that longed for acceptance and the part that refused to apologize for who he was. By the time the bell rang for last period, Jude had made a quiet decision. He would finish the letter. He would leave something behind that might one day make them understand. Little did he know the words he was about to write would echo far beyond the walls of Lincoln High, forcing every single person who had turned away to confront the boy they had tried to erase. The story of Jude and Jason was only beginning, but the first chapter had already been written in pain, silence, and the slow burn of regret that would follow them for years to come. Jude finished the letter that same night under the glow of his desk lamp, the house quiet except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. His handwriting, usually neat, slanted with emotion across 3 full pages. He did not rage or accuse. Instead, he asked questions that cut straight to the heart. Did any of you ever really know me? Was the person who helped you study for finals suddenly worthless the moment you learned who I loved? He wrote about the fear that lived inside him long before they found out, the nights he prayed to be different just to make life easier. He told them he forgave the stares and the silence, but he hoped one day they would forgive themselves. At the bottom he signed simply Jude, no last name needed. He folded the pages carefully, slipped them into an envelope addressed to the senior class, and sealed it with a piece of tape from his art supplies. The next morning he arrived early and slid the envelope under the door of the main office before anyone else showed up. Then he walked to his first class without looking back. The day passed in the same heavy silence, but something inside Jude felt lighter, as if releasing the words had loosened the knot in his chest. Jason watched him from across the quad during lunch, jaw tight, but still said nothing. Sarah noticed the change in Jude's posture and asked what was different. He only shrugged and smiled for the first time in weeks. That afternoon the principal called an emergency assembly. The envelope had been opened. The letter was read aloud over the intercom by the vice principal, voice cracking on certain lines. The gym fell deathly quiet. Jude sat in the back row, heart racing, as hundreds of heads turned toward him. Some faces showed shock, others shame. A few girls wiped tears. Jason stared at the floor, fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. When the assembly ended, no one spoke to Jude, but the boycott felt cracked, fragile. Whispers followed him down the hall, different this time, less cruel, more uncertain. The following week, Jude's father finally broke his silence at dinner. "I don't understand it, son, but I'm not losing you over it." The words were clumsy yet sincere, and Jude felt a crack in the wall between them. His mother cried happy tears. At school, the empty seats around him slowly filled as a few brave students tested the waters. Sarah grinned across the table like they had won a war. Yet Jason remained distant, the guilt in his eyes unmistakable now. Jude caught him lingering near the art room door one afternoon, but when their eyes met, Jason walked away again. The letter had planted seeds of doubt in everyone, including the boy who had once held Jude like he was the only thing that mattered. Jude began to breathe easier. He finished his senior art project, a series of portraits showing faces half in shadow, half in light. Ms. Rivera gave it an A and whispered that the letter had moved her too. College applications went out, and for the first time Jude allowed himself to imagine a life beyond Lincoln High. He spent weekends at the beach again, sketching the waves and letting the salt air wash away the last remnants of daily dread. The internal storm quieted to a manageable ache. He still missed Jason with a sharpness that surprised him, but he refused to chase someone who could not stand beside him in the light. Then the transfer papers arrived. Jude's mother had quietly applied to a magnet school 2 hours away with a stronger arts program. Acceptance came quickly. The decision to leave was bittersweet, but necessary. On his last day, the hallways felt different. Students offered awkward nods or mumbled goodbyes. Sarah hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. "You're the bravest person I know," she said. Jude smiled, eyes stinging. He did not see Jason until the final bell. The quarterback waited by Jude's locker, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than he ever had on the football field. "I read the letter," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." Jude searched those blue eyes for the boy he had loved and found only regret. "I know," Jude replied softly. "Take care of yourself, Jason." He walked away without waiting for more, the sound of his own footsteps echoing like a closing chapter. The move happened the following weekend. Jude packed his sketches, his notebooks, and the pieces of himself he had reclaimed. As the car pulled out of the driveway, he looked back once at the house, the school in the distance, and the town that had tried to break him. The letter had done its job. It had forced them all to look in the mirror. What they saw there would haunt them longer than they knew. In the new town, Jude stepped into a classroom where no one knew his story yet, and for the first time in months he felt the possibility of freedom. Back at Lincoln High, the seniors graduated without him. At the ceremony, the principal mentioned lessons in kindness, and several eyes found the empty chair where Jude would have sat. Jason stood on the football field receiving his scholarship letter, but the applause felt hollow. That night, he sat alone in his truck rereading the letter he had kept hidden in his glove box. The words burned. He had chosen safety over love, popularity over courage, and the cost was a hole in his chest that no trophy could fill. The regret settled in quietly, a constant companion he would carry into college and beyond. Years began to pass. Jude thrived at the new school, made friends who celebrated his art and his truth without hesitation. He dated a kind boy named Alex for a few months, learning that love did not have to hide. His father visited on weekends, slowly learning new language and new ways to show support. His mother beamed at every gallery show. Jude grew taller in spirit, shoulders straighter, eyes brighter. The boy who had been shunned became the young man who refused to shrink. Yet somewhere in the quiet moments he still wondered about Jason, about the classmates who had turned away, about whether his letter had changed anything at all. Jason went to a state university on a football scholarship, throwing himself into practices and parties to drown the guilt. He dated girls because it was expected, but every kiss felt wrong. Late nights he pulled out the letter and read it again, the paper soft from handling. His teammates noticed the change, the way he sometimes stared into space during team meetings. He told no one the truth. The internal conflict raged on, louder now that Jude was gone. Jason realized he had lost more than a boyfriend. He had lost the only person who had ever seen the real him. The regret grew roots, wrapping around his future and refusing to let go. The letter had done exactly what Jude hoped. It left them all with questions they could not answer and a daydream that refused to fade. And so the story continued, stretching across years and miles, waiting for the moment when past and present would collide once more. 5 years later, Jude stood in the bustling gallery of a San Francisco art collective, adjusting the frame of his latest piece. The painting showed two silhouettes on a beach at sunrise, hands almost touching but not quite. Critics called it hauntingly intimate. He had graduated with honors from the California College of the Arts, landed a small studio apartment overlooking the bay, and built a circle of friends who knew every part of his story without flinching. Life felt full in a way the boy in Lincoln High could never have imagined. His mother visited often, proud and loud about her son the artist. His father had even attended the last opening, awkward but present, clapping when the crowd did. The wounds had scarred over, but the memory of that senior year still surfaced sometimes like a bruise when the weather turned cold. Across the city in a different life, Jason sat in a downtown law office wearing a crisp suit that felt like armor. He had quit football after one season at university, discovered a passion for advocacy, and was now an associate at a firm specializing in civil rights. On paper, he had everything: good salary, nice apartment, weekend hikes in Marin. Inside, he carried the letter like a second heartbeat. He had never thrown it away. Some nights he read it aloud to the empty room, whispering the questions back to himself. The regret had matured into a quiet ache that influenced every choice. He volunteered at LGBTQ youth centers but never told anyone why the work felt personal. He dated sporadically, always ending things before they grew serious, afraid of the day someone would look at him the way Jude once had and see the coward underneath. Their worlds collided by accident at a charity art auction benefiting local shelters. Jude was one of the featured artists. Jason had bought tickets because his firm sponsored the event. Jude spotted him first across the crowded room, the same broad shoulders now wrapped in tailored wool, the same blue eyes that had once looked at him with secret tenderness. Time had sharpened Jason's features, added a quiet gravity. Jude's pulse jumped, but he kept smiling for the donors circling his paintings. Jason froze when their eyes met, the wine glass in his hand trembling slightly. Neither moved for a long moment. Then Jason crossed the floor like a man walking toward judgment. "Jude," he said, voice rough with years of unsaid words. "You look incredible." Jude offered a polite smile, the kind reserved for strangers. "Jason, it's been a while." The conversation started stiff, surface level. Jobs, cities, weather. Beneath it, the letter hovered like a ghost. Jason finally asked if they could talk somewhere quieter. They stepped onto the rooftop terrace where the city lights sparkled below and the bay wind carried salt. Jason pulled the folded pages from his inside pocket, worn but intact. "I kept it. I read it every year on the anniversary of that assembly." Jude stared at his own handwriting, surprised it still existed. "Why?" he asked softly. Jason's shoulders dropped. "Because it's the bravest thing anyone ever did for me. It made me see who I really was, and who I failed to be." The conversation spilled out then, years of pent-up truth. Jason admitted the fear that had paralyzed him, the family expectations, the locker room jokes that made him hide. He had come out quietly in college to a therapist, but never publicly, never to the people who mattered. Jude listened without interruption, the old pain rising but not overwhelming. He shared his own journey. The new school, the first real relationship, the therapy that taught him his worth was never up for vote. They talked until the auction ended below and the crowd thinned. When they parted, Jason asked for coffee sometime. Jude hesitated, then nodded. Maybe. No promises. That night Jude stood on his own balcony replaying every word. The boy who had been shunned had grown into a man who no longer needed validation from the past. Yet seeing Jason stirred something gentle and complicated. Across town, Jason lay awake staring at the ceiling, the letter on his nightstand. The regret that had haunted him now felt different, less like punishment and more like a map pointing toward redemption. The classmates from Lincoln High had scattered too. Some had reached out to Jude over the years through social media with awkward apologies. Others still avoided the memory entirely. But the letter had planted seeds in all of them. Sarah, now a teacher herself, kept a copy framed in her classroom as a reminder to protect every student. The principal had retired early, citing unfinished business with compassion. The ripple continued quietly. Over the next months, Jude and Jason met for coffee, then walks along the Embarcadero, then quiet dinners. Conversations grew deeper, safer. Jason began volunteering more openly at the youth center, eventually sharing his story with the teenagers who reminded him of his younger self. Jude watched the change with cautious hope. One evening on the beach, they sat side by side watching the same sunset Jude had sketched years ago. Jason reached for his hand and Jude let him. No kiss, no rush, just the simple warmth of fingers intertwining. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Jason said. "I'm asking for the chance to earn it every day." Jude looked at the man beside him, older, wiser, still carrying the boy he had loved. "We both grew up," he replied. "That's enough for now." The internal conflicts were not gone. Jude still guarded his heart. Jason still fought the voice that whispered he did not deserve this second chance. Family dynamics shifted too. Jason's parents slowly learned the truth during a tense Thanksgiving, tears and silence giving way to tentative acceptance. Jude's father sent a text after seeing a photo of the two of them at an exhibit. "He seems like a good man. Proud of you." The societal pressures remained in subtler forms. Sideways glances at restaurants, cautious language at work events. Yet both men had learned to stand taller. The letter that once divided them now bound them in unexpected ways, a testament that pain could be transformed into purpose. As autumn leaves turned in the parks around the city, Jude realized the journey was far from over. The boy who had been boycotted by his entire class had become the man who chose kindness over revenge. The quarterback who had looked away had become the advocate who refused to look away again. Their story continued to unfold, richer for the scars, brighter for the light they had both fought to reach. The first real test came during Christmas break when Jason invited Jude to spend a weekend at his family's cabin in the Sierras. Snow dusted the pines and the fireplace crackled while they cooked pasta and talked until midnight. Jason's sister, home from grad school, asked direct questions about their history. Jude answered honestly, surprised by how steady his voice stayed. The next morning over coffee, Jason's mother pulled him aside. "I wish we had known back then," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for the part we played in making him hide." The words landed softly, healing something Jude had not realized still hurt. That afternoon they hiked through fresh powder, breath visible in the cold air, hands gloved but linked. Jason stopped on a ridge overlooking the valley. "The letter saved me," he said. "Not because it shamed me, but because it showed me what real courage looks like." Jude smiled, the wind tugging at his scarf. "It saved me too. It let me walk away and become someone new." Back in the city, spring arrived with gallery deadlines and court cases. Jude prepared for his first solo show while Jason argued a landmark case for transgender youth rights. Their evenings blended work and quiet support. Jude sketching at the kitchen table while Jason reviewed briefs, soft music playing in the background. One night Jason came home late, shoulders heavy with the weight of a lost motion. Jude set aside his charcoal and simply held him. No words needed. The tenderness that had once been hidden in shadows now lived openly between them. Yet old fears surfaced. When a former Lincoln classmate posted a reunion photo online tagging both of them, comments flooded in, some kind, some cruel. Jude read them once and closed the app. Jason wanted to respond. Jude stopped him. We don't owe them our story anymore. The decision felt like growth, a boundary drawn with love instead of anger. Summer brought travel. They flew to New York for Jude's exhibit at a small gallery in Chelsea. The opening night buzzed with critics and collectors. Jason stood proudly beside him in a charcoal suit, hand resting lightly on Jude's lower back. A reporter asked about their relationship, and for the first time publicly Jason answered, "He's the reason I learned to be honest with myself." The words traveled online, reaching old classmates who watched from afar. Sarah sent a congratulatory text with a photo of her own classroom where Jude's letter still hung framed. "You changed more lives than you know," she wrote. The validation felt complete yet bittersweet. Some former teammates messaged Jason privately with their own late-coming apologies. The letter's long shadow continued to touch lives years later. Fall returned, and with it the annual reminder. On the anniversary of the assembly, Jason and Jude drove back to Lincoln High for the first time. The school looked smaller, the football field faded. They stood at the edge of the quad where the boycott had begun. Jason pulled the letter from his pocket one last time. "I think it's time to let this rest here," he said. Together they buried the pages in a small metal box beneath the oak tree where they had once shared their first kiss. No ceremony, no tears, just quiet closure. Walking away, Jude felt the last chain release. The town that had shunned him now held only memories, not power. That night, in a nearby hotel, they talked about the future. Jason wanted to propose someday but waited, respecting Jude's pace. Jude spoke of opening his own studio, mentoring young artists who felt different. Their dreams intertwined naturally, built on the foundation the letter had forced them to lay. Family gatherings grew warmer. Jude's father and Jason's parents met for the first time at a neutral restaurant and found common ground in stories of stubborn sons. The societal pressures eased as both men learned to navigate them together, choosing visibility on their own terms. Yet growth is never linear. A difficult client at Jason's firm made homophobic remarks during a meeting, triggering old insecurities. Jude sat with him through the anger and fear, reminding him of the man he had become. In turn, when Jude's solo show received a harsh review questioning the agenda in his work, Jason was there with coffee and unwavering belief. The misunderstandings that once tore them apart now strengthened the bond. Sacrifice looked different now, choosing patience over pride, honesty over comfort, love over fear. The internal crises had evolved into quiet strengths. As winter approached again, they stood on the same San Francisco rooftop where they had first reconnected. City lights glittered below like stars brought down to earth. Jason turned to Jude, eyes steady. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Jude leaned into him, the wind cool against their skin. The boy who had been boycotted and the boy who had looked away had become men who chose each other every single day. The letter that once caused pain had become the bridge that carried them forward. Their story continued, richer, deeper, proof that even the darkest chapters could lead to the brightest light. Word count: 1,000. File 5. The years rolled on with the gentle rhythm of chosen family and hard-won peace. Jude's studio thrived, hosting workshops for queer youth who reminded him daily of his younger self. He watched them find their voices through paint and clay and felt the circle complete. Jason made partner at the firm, his advocacy work earning national recognition. Together they bought a small house in the hills with a studio for Jude and a home office for Jason. Mornings began with coffee on the deck overlooking the bay, quiet conversations about everything and nothing. The letter was never far from mind, but its power had transformed from wound to wisdom. One spring, they received an invitation that surprised them both. Lincoln High's 20-year reunion. Sarah had organized it and included a personal note. No pressure, but many of us have stories to tell you. Jude and Jason discussed it for weeks. Old fears surfaced, but so did curiosity. In the end, they decided to go, not for closure but for the chance to stand in the same halls as whole men. The night arrived warm and golden. The gymnasium had been decorated with streamers and photos from their senior year. When Jude and Jason walked in together, hands linked openly, the room quieted for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause. Former classmates approached one by one. Some offered apologies they had practiced for years. Others simply hugged them, tears in their eyes. The principal, now retired, shook their hands and admitted the letter had changed how he led every school after that. Sarah pulled them aside later, eyes bright. That letter saved more than one life. A girl in my first teaching class came out because of the story I shared about you two. She's thriving now. Jason swallowed hard, the weight lifting further. Jude felt no triumph, only gratitude that pain had rippled into purpose. They danced under the same lights where they had once hidden, this time without shame. The evening ended with laughter and promises to stay in touch. Driving home, Jason rested his hand on Jude's knee. "We did it," he said softly. Jude smiled. "We survived it." Life continued to test them in gentler ways. When Jason's father fell ill, they spent months traveling between hospitals and home, supporting each other through long nights and difficult conversations. Jude's mother moved closer to help with the studio, bringing her endless optimism. Their chosen family expanded. Friends from art circles, colleagues from the firm, young artists they mentored. Holidays became loud and loving. The house filled with stories and food and the kind of belonging neither had known in high school. The societal gaze still existed in subtle forms, but they had learned to meet it with dignity and humor. One quiet evening, Jude found Jason in the studio staring at an old sketch he had kept. The two silhouettes from years ago. "I never told you," Jason said, "but the night you left I sat in my truck and cried for hours. That letter was the first time anyone told me I was worth fighting for." Jude crossed the room and wrapped his arms around him. "You always were." The moment felt like the final piece sliding into place. They had faced the shunning, the silence, the separation, and emerged stronger. The internal conflicts that once raged now whispered reminders to choose courage daily. Summer brought a trip back to the beach where their story had roots. They walked the same sand, waves crashing in rhythm with their steps. Jason stopped, dropped to one knee, and pulled out a simple silver ring. "Marry me," he said, voice steady and sure. "Not because we survived the past, but because I want to build every future day with you." Jude's answer came without hesitation, laughter and tears mixing as he pulled Jason up into a kiss that tasted like salt and second chances. The proposal was quiet, witnessed only by the ocean and the sky. News spread gently through their circles. Sarah cheered over video call. Parents on both sides offered blessings that felt earned. The wedding was small, held at the same gallery where they had reconnected. Art on the walls and love in every corner. Vows spoke of growth and forgiveness, of choosing each other when the world had once chosen division. As they danced their first dance, Jude whispered, "The letter brought us here." Jason smiled against his cheek. "And love kept us here." The years that followed were filled with ordinary magic. Gallery openings, court victories, quiet mornings, loud holidays. They mentored together, sharing their story selectively with those who needed to hear it. The classmates who once boycotted them sent cards on anniversaries, some still carrying private regret, others fully transformed. The ripple continued, quiet and constant. Jude and Jason lived the truth the letter had demanded. That love between men was never the problem. Fear was. Their life together proved it every single day. Decades later, Jude and Jason sat on the porch of their hilltop home, watching the sunset paint the bay in hues of gold and rose. Their hair had silvered, laugh lines deepened, but the way they held hands remained unchanged. The studio still hummed with young artists. The advocacy work continued through foundations they had built. Grandnieces and nephews visited on weekends, learning without shame that love came in many forms. The letter itself had been preserved in a museum exhibit on courage in education, its words now part of history rather than private pain. They had faced every season together. Health scares, career shifts, the loss of parents, the joy of chosen family expanding. Each challenge had only strengthened the bond forged in fire. Old classmates occasionally reached out, some still haunted by that senior year, others grateful for the lesson it taught their own children. Sarah visited often, now a grandmother herself, and they laughed about the boycotts and the silence that once felt insurmountable. The town of Lincoln High had changed too. Rainbow flags in classrooms and support groups named in quiet honor of the letter no one forgot. One golden evening Jason turned to Jude and asked the question that had lingered unspoken for years. "Do you ever regret any of it?" Jude looked at the man beside him, the boy he had loved and lost and found again. "Not for a second," he answered. "The pain shaped us. The love saved us." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky blooming with color. The journey that began with a classroom shunning had become a lifetime of chosen courage, forgiveness, and unbreakable connection. The story of Jude and Jason proved that one letter, one act of honesty, could echo through decades and change countless lives. It showed that regret could transform into redemption, silence into strength, and division into the deepest kind of unity. Their love had not been easy, but it had been true, and that truth had set them both free. Is it true that one moment of courage can heal a lifetime of regret? Or is it false because some choices echo forever?